A millionaire invited her maid to a birthday party to humiliate her. But when she arrived, before watching the video, please leave a like to support our channel. The sun poured in like honey through the grand bay windows of the Ellington estate, casting a soft golden hue over marble floors and velvet drapes. Outside, the world moved, but in that mansion, time seemed to sit still, luxurious, silent, and cold. Cassandra Ellington stood poised in front of her mirror, a woman of 26, polished to near perfection. Her sleek satin gown shimmered like moonlight. Her diamond earrings whispered wealth with every subtle movement of her head, and her lips were painted in the same shade of crimson her mother had once called power. But behind those icy blue eyes was a mind at play, sharp, calculating, and tonight, especially cruel. For Cassandra, wealth wasn't just a blessing. It was a tool, a shield, a weapon. She'd been raised to believe that class wasn't about character. It was about the cut of a dress, the vintage of a wine, the lineage in a surname. And that's why, as she sipped her imported champagne and peered out the window at the garden, a smirk curled on her lips. There beneath the scorching sun knelt Maria, her maid. She was trimming the rose bushes with worn gloves, her blouse damp with sweat, her back curved from long hours of labor. Maria was 30, quiet, diligent, and strikingly beautiful in a way that Cassandra couldn't ignore, not because of fashion, not because of money, but because she carried herself with a calm strength, a kind of grace that wasn't bought or taught, and Cassandra hated it. She thinks kindness makes her strong, Cassandra whispered to herself, eyes narrowing. Let's see how she handles cruelty in silken stilettos. That's when the idea was born. She wouldn't just throw another grand birthday gala for herself this year. No, she'd turn it into something else, an elegant battlefield. And at the center of it all would be Maria, her unknowing pawn, her guest of dishonor. Cassandra set down her glass and stepped away from her vanity with purpose. As she made her way down the stairs and into the garden, the air around her seemed to change, still and thick with anticipation. Maria looked up, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, her face breaking into a sincere, tired smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Cassandra," she said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. And Cassandra, voice warm like honey but heart cold as steel, replied, "Maria, my dear, I've been thinking. You've worked so hard lately, and I'd like to reward you with something special." Maria stood frozen for a moment, unsure if she'd heard right. Her hands were still covered in garden soil, her heart thudding in her chest. "A reward, Miss Cassandra?" she asked, her voice low and almost cautious. "For me?" Cassandra tilted her head, a smile too wide spreading across her face. "Yes, darling, my birthday gala is this Saturday evening, and I've decided I want you to come, as my guest." Maria blinked, clearly stunned. "Me? But I wouldn't know how to act in a place like that." "Nonsense," Cassandra said, waving away Maria's protest like dust on a mirror. "You've worked hard. You deserve a night to see what real elegance feels like." Maria, though unsure, nodded with a hesitant smile. "Thank you, Miss Cassandra. That's very kind of you." Kind. The word burned in Cassandra's ears. Once back inside her suite, Cassandra dropped the polite smile like a mask. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Chloe," she said curtly when her assistant answered. "I need a dress. Not for me, for Maria. It should be unique, loud, and very, very wrong." There was a short pause on the other end. "How wrong, Miss Cassandra?" "Think puffed sleeves, think glitter, think a nightmare at a royal ball," she said, swirling her wine glass. "And make sure it's 2 sizes too large." "Got it," Chloe replied. She never asked questions. She was paid not to. Saturday came with a blazing sunset, painting the city in golden streaks as the luxury hotel glowed on the cliff's edge, waiting to host the most glamorous party of the year. Cassandra descended the marble staircase in her designer gown like royalty. Her smile was radiant. Her earrings sparkled. And beside her stood Maria, nervously pulling at the hem of her outrageous green dress. It was big. It was loud. It had bows in strange places and a skirt that could smother a dining table. Maria looked like a character from a forgotten children's play. Cassandra, ever the hostess, extended her hand dramatically as their Rolls-Royce rolled up to the red carpet. "Smile, dear," she whispered. "You're about to walk into a world you've never seen." And as Maria stepped out of the car, the flashes of cameras erupted like fireworks. But it wasn't admiration in the air, it was confusion, followed by amusement. The elite turned their heads. Their eyes widened, and the whispers began. Cassandra basked in it. This moment, was everything she had planned. The ballroom sparkled like a dream, crystal chandeliers cascading golden light across polished marble floors, velvet drapes the color of wine lining the windows, and orchestral music drifting through the air like perfume. Maria stood just inside the entrance, her hands clutched tightly in front of her. The green dress Chloe had chosen swallowed her petite frame. The hem dragged slightly, and the exaggerated sleeves made her feel like she was part of a costume show, not a birthday gala. Cassandra was already working the room, gliding from group to group, her laughter perfectly timed, her hand gestures graceful, rehearsed. Every now and then, she'd cast a sidelong glance toward Maria, watching her struggle. A pair of young socialites approached Maria with flutes of champagne in hand. "Oh, you must be the special guest," one of them said. Her voice dipped in syrupy sarcasm. Maria smiled nervously. "Yes, Miss Cassandra invited me." The other woman's eyes swept Maria's dress. "That's such a bold choice. Vintage, perhaps?" Maria blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I'm not sure. It was a gift." The two women exchanged a look that said everything and nothing at all. "Charming," one of them murmured before drifting away. The laughter, though soft, hit Maria like wind through a cracked window. She stood near the edge of the room watching as servers in black suits passed by with trays of canapes she didn't dare touch, as couples in evening gowns and tuxedos danced beneath chandeliers, completely at ease in this world of silent power and polished cruelty. A voice came from behind her, low, playful, and utterly confident. "Tell me, do you believe in colonizing Mars?" Maria turned around. A man in his 30s, sharp-jawed, wearing a tuxedo tailored so precisely it must have cost a small fortune, looked at her with amusement in his eyes. I, I'm not sure," Maria said carefully. "I guess if people are going to Mars, they'll need someone who knows how to grow tomatoes." There was a moment of pause, and then unexpectedly, he laughed. A real laugh. But before Maria could feel relieved, Cassandra appeared beside him. "Oh, Esteban," she said, linking arms with him casually. "Isn't she just delightful? So grounded, so authentic." Maria stood still, the tightness in her chest growing heavier with every passing second. The jokes kept coming. Not direct insults, never quite that, but there were knowing smirks, mock curiosity about her domestic wisdom, and one too many questions about how many dusting techniques she'd mastered. And yet, Maria stayed. She nodded politely. She smiled. She answered every question with grace, no matter how sharp the edge beneath the words. But when the music rose and the guests twirled in silken splendor, Maria slipped quietly away. In the quiet solitude of the powder room, she stood before the mirror. Her reflection looked back, eyes rimmed red, the green dress drooping off one shoulder, her dignity barely held together. She washed her hands slowly, splashing cold water on her face. She whispered to herself, "You've come this far, Maria. Don't let them take what they don't understand." She looked up, and for the first time all night, her gaze didn't waver. Just as Maria was about to re-enter the ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd inside. The violins tapered off mid-measure. The murmur of champagne-fueled conversations froze mid-sentence. Even Cassandra, in the middle of a shallow compliment, paused and turned toward the grand entrance. A tall figure stepped into the light, casting a long shadow across the marbled floor. His silver hair was brushed back neatly, his suit sharp but understated, and on his wrist, a single item sparkled with more command than any Rolex or diamond, a silver watch with an inscription only a few in the room would recognize. Alfred Langston. The Alfred Langston. The man whose investments had saved entire industries. The quiet billionaire who had outlived 3 financial empires, funded dozens of humanitarian efforts, and was known not for his wealth, but for his discernment. And now he stood at the entrance of Cassandra's birthday gala, scanning the room with calm, discerning eyes. Cassandra's smile returned instantly. "Mr. Langston," she called out, weaving through the guests with a tone sugary enough to rot teeth. What an absolute honor. He raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-approach. Don't mind me, Cassandra. I'm only here for a moment. I've heard a lot about tonight, he said, his voice smooth and warm like old jazz, and about a very special guest. He turned, not to Cassandra, but toward Maria. She had just stepped back into the ballroom, wiping her damp hands on her green dress, when her eyes locked with his. Everyone turned to see who he was walking toward. Whispers spread like spilled champagne. Why was Alfred Langston looking at her? He walked slowly, deliberately, his eyes kind but sharp as ever. When he reached her, he did not hesitate. He extended his hand and said, Maria, isn't it? I've been hoping to meet you. Maria blinked, her throat dry. I'm sorry, sir. Have we met? No, Alfred replied, but I know who you are, and I know what you've done. A hush fell over the room again. Cassandra's face paled. A drop of wine trembled in her crystal flute. I don't understand, Maria said, her voice low. You don't need to, Alfred said gently, but everyone else should. He turned to the crowd. I'd like to say something. No one dared interrupt. I've been around a long time, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the ballroom, long enough to see what character looks like. And tonight I've seen more courage in this young woman than in all the tailored suits in this room combined. Gasps echoed. Cassandra's jaw clenched. This world, Alfred continued, celebrates noise, wealth, flash. But Maria reminded me that dignity is quiet, that kindness doesn't need an invitation, and that true strength is often mistaken for simplicity. He looked back at Maria, eyes warm. You've reminded an old man what humility looks like. For a moment, Maria couldn't breathe. She didn't know whether to cry or run. Instead, she did something else. She stood a little taller, smiled, not the uncertain smile she had worn all evening, but one full of quiet pride. The ballroom erupted in applause, genuine, thunderous applause. Not for Cassandra, not for the luxury, not for the power, for Maria. As the clapping slowly faded, Alfred took a breath and stepped closer to Maria. His voice, though softer now, still carried across the gilded room. I suppose, he said with a faint smile, the time has come to let everyone in on a little secret. The guests leaned forward as one, hungry for the drama, but even more for the truth. He turned to Maria. Shall I, or would you like the honor? Maria hesitated, then she nodded. Her eyes were clear now, still humble, but no longer afraid. I'll do it, she said softly. It's time. She turned to face the guests. No microphone, no platform, just her. And yet her voice reached every corner. My name is Maria Castillo. I was born in a small town in New Mexico. My parents were teachers, people who taught me that the value of a person is never tied to their title or their clothes, but to their kindness. She took a breath. I came to the city 12 years ago, not with dreams of being rich, but with dreams of being useful. I cleaned homes, cooked meals, took care of other people's children. I did it with pride because honest work is never beneath anyone. She scanned the room. Many of the guests looked away now, shame creeping into their chiseled features. But a few years ago, she continued, something changed. I saw people around me struggling, elderly neighbors losing their homes, young students dropping out of school because they couldn't afford tuition, single mothers working 3 jobs just to survive. She swallowed. So I started giving. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. I gave what I had, then more. Then I started a small charity, using another name. I never wanted recognition. I wanted change, and tonight, she looked over at Alfred. I see that maybe, just maybe, kindness can still matter in a room like this. Silence. Then Alfred stepped forward again, holding up a single envelope. This, he said, is the record of Maria's anonymous donations over the past 5 years. Over $6 million, all given quietly. No press releases, no tax breaks, just impact. He looked back at the stunned crowd. You all came here tonight to celebrate power. But power without purpose is just noise. He held the envelope aloft, then handed it to Maria. Cassandra stood frozen, pale, speechless. A camera flash went off, not at her, but at Maria. And for the first time in her life, Cassandra realized something she'd never even considered. She had money, but Maria had meaning. Cassandra stood alone now. The room buzzed with energy, but none of it orbited around her. She was no longer the star of the show, no longer the queen of whispered admiration. Cameras turned toward Maria. Conversations shifted away from Rolexes and private jets to scholarship funds and community kitchens. It was as if the room had woken from a long golden dream, and Cassandra had been left behind in the dark. Her heels clicked softly on the marble as she stepped back from the crowd. She reached the grand window overlooking the ocean, gripping the sill like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Outside, the tide rolled in steady waves as if mocking her inner storm. How could it all have unraveled so quickly? Just hours ago, she'd basked in the glory of her cruelty, convinced she was untouchable. Now she felt invisible. And what stung most wasn't the shame. It was the realization that somewhere deep down, a part of her knew this had been coming. Behind her, she heard voices, murmured praise for Maria, Alfred's warm laugh, Paul's genuine admiration. She heard Maria saying kind words to guests who had sneered at her just hours before. And Cassandra remembered every cutting word she had spoken that night, every cruel joke, every smirk. For a moment, she wished she could vanish, but then quiet footsteps approached. Cassandra. The voice was soft, gentle, and yet it pierced through her better than any sharp rebuke. She turned. Maria stood there, not triumphant, not smug, just human. "I thought you'd be celebrating," Cassandra muttered, eyes still on the glass. "I am," Maria said, "but I didn't want to leave without saying something to you." Cassandra laughed bitterly. "To rub it in?" Maria stepped closer, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. "No, to say thank you." Cassandra blinked. "Excuse me?" "If you hadn't invited me tonight," Maria said quietly, "I might have kept hiding forever. I might have never spoken up. You didn't mean to, but you helped me find my voice." Cassandra looked at her, truly looked, and saw no sarcasm, no hidden barb, just truth. "But I tried to humiliate you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Maria nodded, and it hurt, deeply. But what matters more is what you do after hurting someone. Cassandra's eyes filled with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Tears, not of frustration, not of being caught, but of shame, of truth, of something old inside her finally cracking open. "I was raised to believe kindness was weakness," she whispered. That image mattered more than honesty. That power was everything. Maria didn't reply. She let the silence speak for itself. "I don't want to be like that anymore," Cassandra said. Maria reached out, not to hug, not to comfort, but to offer something harder, forgiveness. "I believe people can change," she said. "I've seen it, I've lived it. But change doesn't come from words, it comes from choices." Cassandra nodded slowly, her gaze returning to the sea. "Then I guess I have a lot of choices to make." The mansion was quieter than usual. The grand halls that once echoed with idle chatter and clinking crystal now carried the faint hum of a vacuum, the soft swish of a broom and the occasional thud of moving furniture. But this time, it wasn't Maria or the house staff making the effort. It was Cassandra. Hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, she scrubbed the marble steps with trembling fingers. The scent of lemon polish filled the air as sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, bathing her in a brightness she hadn't truly seen in years, not like this. Maria stood a few feet away, dusting the ornate banister with practiced ease. She didn't say much, just offered a small smile every now and then, a quiet nod of encouragement. Cassandra had asked for this. She had looked Maria in the eye the night before and said, "I need to start over. I want to learn what it means to do something. Honest." And Maria, ever gentle, had said only, "Then meet me at 7 a.m. Wear something you can sweat in." Now here they were. For the first time in Cassandra's life, no one waited on her. No one poured her coffee. No one carried her purse. Her hands ached, her back tensed from unfamiliar labor. But her heart, it felt strangely light. "Did you always wake up this early?" she asked between sweeps. Maria chuckled softly. "Always. Mornings when the house feels alive, before anyone speaks, before the city hums, it's quiet enough to hear your thoughts." Cassandra paused, the broom in her hand, and looked out at the trimmed hedges and blooming roses. "I think I spent so long avoiding my thoughts," she murmured. "Noise, parties, status. It's like I forgot how to just be." Maria didn't judge, she just handed Cassandra a clean rag. Then today, she said, we learn how to just be. They cleaned together for hours, side by side, no music, no distractions, just the steady rhythm of labor and the occasional shared story. Maria told Cassandra about her childhood, how she used to dance barefoot in the rain with her siblings, how she'd learned to cook by watching her grandmother, how her first paycheck had bought her mother a new pair of shoes. Cassandra listened like every word was a lesson she'd never been taught. By noon, her clothes were stained, her palms blistered, and her hair clung to her forehead in sweaty strands, but she had never felt more real, more grounded, more human. Later, they sat on the back porch with glasses of water and bowls of fresh fruit, the garden rustling in a soft afternoon breeze. I don't think I've earned forgiveness, Cassandra said quietly. Maria sipped her water. Maybe not yet, but you've taken the first step. And what comes next? Maria looked at her, eyes calm and steady. Consistency, humility, doing the work, not just around the house, but in your heart. Cassandra exhaled. That's going to take time. Maria smiled. Good things always do. It started with a broom, then a mop, then a dish towel. And before long, Cassandra found herself navigating corners of life she never knew existed. Soup kitchens, shelters, church basements, where children's shoes clattered against the floor and laughter echoed in rooms that smelled of fresh bread and hope. Maria had invited her one Sunday to a small community center nestled between forgotten brick buildings in a quieter part of town. Cassandra had hesitated. She'd worn designer clothes her entire life. But that morning, she zipped herself into a plain gray hoodie, pulled her hair back in a low bun, and told her driver she'd walk. Inside, the room buzzed with life. Children ran around with paper name tags and jam-smeared cheeks. Older women in floral aprons stirred steaming pots. Volunteers handed out warm clothes, sat with the lonely, translated forms for the confused. It was not the world Cassandra had known, but it was the world Maria had called home. Don't try to lead here, Maria whispered as they stood by the doorway. Just listen, then serve. So Cassandra did. She filled food trays. She knelt to tie the loose shoelaces of a boy who reminded her of someone she used to be. She carried stacks of canned goods. She laughed, softly at first, then more freely, more often. She found herself drawn to an older woman with kind eyes and a crooked posture named Mrs. Ellis. The woman told stories of raising 5 kids alone after her husband passed away in a factory accident. You remind me of my oldest, Mrs. Ellis said, squeezing Cassandra's hand. Always so sharp, but she never learned how to be soft. Cassandra blinked. That night, the words echoed in her dreams. She began returning every Sunday, then Wednesdays, then Fridays, and slowly people began to smile when they saw her coming. Not the tight smiles of socialites, but real ones. Children ran to her. Parents offered her chairs. She began organizing book drives, bringing extra food, coordinating with old friends who still held power but had never been asked to give. For the first time, Cassandra was using her influence not to elevate herself, but to uplift others. It wasn't easy. Some scoffed, others doubted her motives. What's the catch? A young man asked her once. You trying to polish your image? She had looked him in the eyes and answered quietly, I'm trying to become the kind of person I should have been all along. And over time, hearts softened, minds changed, walls fell. Maria watched from a distance, quietly proud, gently guiding. She never boasted, never sought credit, but in every act of Cassandra's transformation, her presence was there, steady, graceful, and strong. Back at the mansion, things changed too. Cassandra dismissed most of the staff, not to punish, but to take responsibility. She cooked her own meals, she cleaned her own sheets, she learned how to scrub tiles, how to fix a jammed window, how to breathe in the silence without reaching for distraction. The mirrors in her home reflected someone different now, not the polished heiress with calculated charm, but a woman in progress, one who had learned to cry without shame, to laugh without cruelty, and to give without expecting applause. One evening, as the sun melted into soft gold across the horizon, Maria found her planting daisies in the garden. I thought you hated dirt, Maria teased. Cassandra smiled, her nails dark with soil. Turns out, good things grow from it. The ballroom at the Metropolitan Heritage Foundation gleamed like a jewel. Every year, the city's most powerful gathered under its dome ceiling to applaud themselves. Speeches, awards, performances, champagne towers, silk gowns, and this year, a surprising name had made its way onto the evening's printed program. Keynote speaker, Miss Cassandra Wexley. Her name was printed in gold. When she first received the invitation, she had laughed aloud. "Why would they want me to speak?" Maria, ever steady, replied, "Maybe it's time people heard what you've really been through." So Cassandra agreed, not for prestige, but because if her voice could do even a fraction of what Emma's presence once did for her, then maybe, just maybe, it was worth stepping into the light again. She wore a simple navy dress that night, no sequins, no plunging neckline, just grace, maturity, and humility. Her hair was pulled back, lips painted a soft rose. When she stepped onto the stage, the audience quieted. Her name still held weight. But what they saw now, what they heard, was no longer the cruel heiress they remembered from tabloids and whispered gossip. She approached the microphone and looked out across the crowd. Then she began. "Good evening. My name is Cassandra Wexley. Some of you know me as the girl who once threw a birthday party that made headlines. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was cruel. I humiliated someone I called a friend. I invited a woman to be laughed at. Someone whose only crime was being kinder, more graceful, and more honest than I ever was. I did it because I wanted to feel powerful. Because I had grown up believing that stepping on someone else was the only way to stand taller." A hush fell deeper. But that woman, Maria, didn't get angry. She didn't curse me or expose me. She simply stood tall. And when the truth came out, when the world realized she was the one behind countless anonymous donations, the one who had been changing lives in silence, it was me who became small. That night, I didn't just lose the spotlight. I lost my illusions, my pride, my ignorance, and I thank God every day for it. She paused. The crowd stared. No champagne, no applause yet, just breath held. I am not the same person I was. But I carry her memory like a scar, a reminder of who I must never become again. I stand before you now not to impress you, but to tell the truth. Because I believe the world doesn't need more performances. It needs more apologies. It needs more people willing to own their wrongs and then change. Somewhere in the front row, a woman dabbed her eyes. Maria taught me that the most powerful people aren't the ones who are feared. They're the ones who are kind. The ones who give quietly, live humbly, and forgive even when they have been wronged. She is my greatest teacher. And tonight I dedicate whatever good I may do from this day forward to her legacy. The room burst into applause, but Cassandra didn't smile for the cameras. She looked to the side of the stage, where Maria stood quietly, hands clasped, tears in her eyes. Their eyes had met, and in that moment, without words, they understood each other completely. It started with a bench, just an old, weathered bench outside a shuttered youth center in the heart of the city. Cassandra passed it every day on her way home. She would slow her car just a little, eyes drifting toward the boarded windows, the spray-painted walls, the ghosts of laughter that once lived inside. One morning, she didn't just pass by. She parked and sat. The bench groaned beneath her, but the silence around her was heavier. The air smelled of old paint, dust, and memory. She took out her phone, snapped a picture of the broken door, and texted it to Maria. "What if we brought this place back to life?" The response came almost instantly. "Let's talk over tea." That afternoon, Cassandra and Maria sat at a small table on Maria's porch, mugs of chamomile in their hands and hope in their eyes. It was quiet, not the kind of silence that lingers from pain, but the kind that grows before something beautiful blooms. "We could turn it into a community hub," Cassandra said, her voice tentative but steady. "Workshops, tutoring, health services, safe spaces for women, for kids." Maria nodded. "We'd need partners, volunteers, funding." "I have connections," Cassandra said. "And I know the heart of this neighborhood," Maria replied, and that was enough. They named it the Olive House, a symbol of peace and new beginnings. The first brick was laid in spring, under skies soft with clouds and birdsong. Local artists painted murals on the walls, bright, bold images of unity and hope. The word welcome was written in over a dozen languages by children who would one day walk through the very doors they helped paint. On opening day, the line stretched around the block. Inside, volunteers handed out fresh meals, backpacks, free health kits, and gently used coats. There was a music room, a reading corner, a counseling office staffed by professionals who once needed counseling themselves. Cassandra stood by the door, greeting each person like an old friend. Maria moved through the rooms like sunlight, checking on every smile, every laugh, every tear. She didn't need a name tag. Everyone already knew who she was. One afternoon, a little girl named Lena approached Cassandra, a crumpled drawing in her hand. "It's you and the other lady," she said proudly. Cassandra unfolded the paper. Stick figures stood hand in hand, surrounded by flowers and what appeared to be a giant heart. "She says you used to be mean," Lena Mom added with childlike honesty. Cassandra laughed. "I did. I was. But you're nice now." "I try to be." The little girl leaned in. "It's working." At night, after the last child left, Cassandra and Maria often sat on the front steps of the Olive House. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Sometimes healing speaks loudest in silence. "I used to think power meant being feared," Cassandra said once. Maria smiled softly, staring at the streetlight flickering above. "And now? Now I think it means choosing love, especially when it's hard." Maria reached over, placing her hand gently over Cassandra's. "You chose it, and you kept choosing it. That matters." It arrived in a plain white envelope, slipped quietly under the door of Cassandra's apartment, like a ghost from a life she no longer claimed. No return address, no markings, just her name, handwritten in ink that trembled slightly, as though the pen had been held by unsure fingers. She stared at it for a long time, the mug of tea in her hand growing cold. Her first instinct was to throw it away. She'd spent so much time rebuilding her life, laying down bricks of kindness over foundations once made of arrogance. But something about the handwriting, something familiar, made her hesitate. She opened it. "Dear Cassandra, you don't know me, but I knew your father. I worked for him once, before everything fell apart, before he destroyed my life." The words punched through her like wind through an open door. "I'm not writing for vengeance or pity. I'm writing because I found something among my old things, something I think you should see. Enclosed is a copy. The original is with my lawyer. You may not know what your father did to some of us, but we never forgot. I don't want to hurt you, but I think the truth matters. Even now. Sincerely, Jonah Wallace." Her hands shook as she pulled out the second folded paper. It was a contract, a binding agreement, signed, dated, bearing her father's name and Jonah Wallace's. It outlined a betrayal. Jonah's startup company had been absorbed, stripped, and left to die. And on it, scrawled in her father's sharp cursive, were words that chilled her. "If he's too stupid to protect his own work, he deserves to lose it." She sat down, hard, as if the weight of her father's sins had finally come crashing down through the ceiling of the life she'd been trying to build. That night, Cassandra didn't sleep. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning in circles. She had forgiven herself for who she had been, but how could she ask others to forgive her for what her family had done? When morning came, she brought the letter to Maria. "I don't know what to do," Cassandra said, her voice small. "I didn't know, but maybe I should have, and now I feel like a fraud." Maria read the letter in silence. Then she folded it neatly and set it aside. "You didn't write those words, Cass. But his money built my life. My name opened doors. I'm using the same last name that broke his." Maria met her eyes. "Then maybe it's time to change what that name stands for." They called a board meeting at the Olive House. Volunteers, neighbors, donors, and Cassandra stood in front of them, hands trembling but voice clear. "My family made their fortune by hurting others," she said, "by taking what didn't belong to them. And while I didn't know the details, I benefited from that legacy. I need to be honest with all of you, and I want to make things right." She paused, scanning the room. "I want to publicly acknowledge the harm my family caused and start a restitution fund using our remaining family wealth to support small businesses that were taken advantage of, starting with Jonah Wallace." There was a beat of silence. Then one of the older volunteers stood, tears in his eyes. "Your father made a mess, but you, child, you're cleaning it." The room stood and applauded, not because she was perfect, but because she was brave. Jonah Wallace received the first grant. He didn't reply. But a month later, a package arrived. Inside was a small wooden carving, two hands cupped around a flame, and a note. To protect something small, you must be strong. Thank you for being strong. J.W. Cassandra wept when she held it. The garden behind the olive house had always been a quiet place, a forgotten patch of earth. More weeds than flowers, more memories than moments. But this spring, it began to change. It started with a single rosemary bush. Cassandra planted it herself, kneeling in the warm soil with Maria beside her designer gloves long gone. Her fingers were stained with dirt, her nails chipped. But her heart had never felt more whole. This one's for resilience, she said, pressing the roots into the ground. Maria smiled, handing her a trowel. Then this one, she said, planting lavender beside it, is for peace. They didn't say much as they worked. They didn't need to. Redemption wasn't loud. It didn't shout in headlines or hashtags. It whispered in the wind and bloomed in silence. Word spread quickly. Not about Cassandra's past, but about her present. She had kept her promise. The restitution fund helped rebuild 3 small businesses in the first month. Jonah's former business partner, who had given up after their company folded, received a grant to reopen his art gallery. A retired teacher whose pension was lost in a shady deal had her rent paid for a year. And an immigrant family, once evicted when Emily's father bought out their neighborhood, was offered a small home, fully furnished with no strings attached. And always at the bottom of each letter Cassandra sent was one line. This won't erase the past, but I hope it plants something new. The olive house garden became a metaphor. Each flower had a name. One rose bush was for Cassandra's mother, who died never knowing her daughter would bloom so differently. A patch of violets for Maria's abuela, who taught her how to love people fiercely. A bed of marigolds in memory of Jonah Wallace's company, once stolen, now honored. And right in the center, a wild sunflower, stubborn, bold, uncontainable, planted in secret by a little girl from the neighborhood who came every Saturday to water it. Why a sunflower? Cassandra asked her one morning. The girl shrugged. Because they turn to the light, even when it's hard to find. Every week, more volunteers came. Some had lost homes. Some had lost hope. Some had simply lost themselves. But under the shade of the olive tree in the center of the garden, they found something they didn't expect. Dignity. They cleaned together, planted together, cried together, and slowly they grew together. Maria called it a miracle. Cassandra called it grace. One afternoon, a man in a wheelchair rolled up the gravel path. He didn't speak at first, just watched. Watched as Cassandra knelt in the soil. Watched as she handed a shovel to a teenage boy who once shoplifted from her family's store. Watched as she laughed with a woman who used to beg at the market corner. Then he said, I knew your father. Cassandra stood. I was the janitor at one of his companies, fired after I spoke up about some illegal practices. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I want to do better than he did. He nodded. You are. And then he handed her a packet of seeds. Chamomile, he said, good for healing. For most of her life, Cassandra Prescott's birthdays had been grandiose performances. Ice sculptures, champagne towers, string quartets flown in from Europe. Celebrations designed not to bring joy, but to assert status. They were declarations, not milestones. But this year was different. This year she wanted something else entirely. She wanted truth. She wanted simplicity. She wanted gratitude. And so for the first time in her 29 years, Cassandra didn't rent a ballroom or hire a PR firm. She didn't commission a theme or curate a guest list of elites. Instead, she walked into the Olive House kitchen one morning in early June and said softly to Maria, I want to celebrate, but only if it means something. Maria looked up from kneading dough, her brow raised. Then make it about someone else, she said. Cassandra smiled. That's exactly what I was thinking. The invitations went out not on embossed stationery, but as handwritten notes. No gowns required, no titles needed, no expectations. Just one request. Bring a story, a memory, a seed of hope. She didn't invite anyone from the old world of boardrooms and backstabbing. She invited Jonah Wallace and his wife. She invited Mrs. Henderson from the community center, who ran after-school programs on a budget held together with paper clips and miracles. She invited the grocery clerk who always rounded down for families who came up short at the register. She invited every person the Olive House had helped, and those it hadn't yet, and she invited Emma, because of course she did. The day of the party dawned warm and golden. The garden, once bare and broken, had transformed into something radiant. Cloth-covered tables stood under strings of lights that twinkled even before sunset. Wildflowers in mason jars lined every path. A soft acoustic trio played under the olive tree, their music folding into the rustle of leaves like windswept prayers. Cassandra wore a simple white linen dress and flat sandals. She hadn't touched her makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and yet she had never felt more beautiful. Guests began to arrive, not in limousines, but on foot, on bikes and beat-up sedans. They brought dishes wrapped in foil, stories tucked into pockets, smiles worn without effort. There was no red carpet, no camera crew, but there was laughter, there were hugs, there were tears, and above all, there was love. Cassandra stood up midway through the evening, the soft hum of conversation pausing gently as she raised her glass. "Thank you," she said, voice slightly trembling, "for showing up, for showing me how to live differently, and for reminding me that birthdays aren't for showing off what you've gathered, but for giving back what you've learned." She took a breath. "I've learned that love has more currency than money, that service gives more joy than success, and that sometimes healing begins when you stop asking for applause and start asking, 'How can I help?'" Someone began to clap, then another, then everyone, but Cassandra wasn't finished. "This garden, this home, this community, it's not mine, it's ours. And moving forward, I want every June 7th to be a celebration not of me, but of what we're building together." As the sun dipped below the hills and lanterns began to glow, someone wheeled in a cake, not a seven-tiered spectacle, but a homemade carrot cake, slightly lopsided, frosted with love and clove-scented icing. The candles flickered, and Cassandra closed her eyes. She made a wish, not for success or luxury or status. She wished for courage, to keep becoming, to keep giving, to keep blooming. The day after the birthday gathering, the Olive House was quieter than usual. The clinking of dishes in the kitchen was gentler, the laughter more reflective, as if the garden itself was still holding its breath after the night of stories and celebration. Cassandra moved slowly through the old study, sorting through books that had been donated to the community lending shelf they had started just 2 months prior. Between the dusty volumes of poetry and a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, she spotted a plain envelope. No name, no stamp, no handwriting on the front. It was tucked into the back cover of a journal she didn't remember seeing before. Leather-bound, old, familiar. Her fingers hesitated over the seal. Then gently, reverently, she opened it. Inside was a letter, not printed, but handwritten, delicate cursive in blue ink, a little shaky at the edges, like someone had written it late at night when their heart was heavier than their hands. It was addressed simply, "For Cassandra. In case I'm ever brave enough to give this to you, Emma. Dear Cassandra, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever find the right moment or the courage to hand it to you. But some thoughts feel too important to leave unspoken, even if they are only whispered to paper. You once asked me why I chose to work here. You assumed it was because I had no other option. Maybe you were right at first. Maybe I came here because I was tired, broken, needing to hide in the silence of someone else's house. But that's not why I stayed. I stayed because I saw someone else who was hiding too. Someone with a world of power in her name and nothing but sadness in her eyes. I saw the way you looked out the window when you thought no one was watching. I saw the weight you carried, the kind that doesn't show on shoulders but on souls. And I saw something else. A spark. A girl who hadn't yet given up on kindness. A woman who wanted to believe there was more to life than control. I saw you the way I once wished someone would see me. So I stayed. Not for the paycheck, not for the safety. I stayed to be part of your healing. And in doing so, I found my own. We're both women of second chances, Cassandra. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but if one day you find this, I hope you'll know. I believed in you long before you ever believed in yourself, and I always will. Emma. Cassandra read the letter 3 times. The third time she cried. She cried not because the words hurt, but because they healed. She cried for the girl she had once been and the woman she was slowly becoming. She cried for the way she had misjudged and for the grace that had been given anyway. And when she finally folded the letter and placed it in a frame, setting it above her writing desk, she whispered aloud, "Thank you, Emma. I didn't know I needed this, but I did." That night, she sat under the olive tree with a cup of tea and a pen in her hand. She didn't write for the world. She didn't write for her image or her brand. She wrote a letter back. "Dear Emma, I found your words, and I'm still shaking. You say you stayed because you believed in me, but it was you who taught me how to believe again." It was a warm Sunday morning, and the Olive House was alive with laughter and fresh bread. The scent of cinnamon rolls lingered in the air, and children darted between the garden paths, chasing each other with chalk-covered hands and carefree joy. Cassandra sat on the back porch, sipping her coffee from a handmade mug Emma had once gifted her, glazed in soft green, with the word enough etched into the base. A small smile played on her lips as she watched a volunteer try to teach 3 kids how to plant basil in neat rows. Life had found a rhythm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. That's why she wasn't prepared for the man who stepped through the front gate. He didn't look like a threat. Not at first. Mid-50s, sharp suit, still in shape, too polished for a lazy Sunday morning, and too familiar to ignore. Cassandra's heart slowed, then thundered. "Grayson," she whispered under her breath. The man smiled. "Hello, Cassie." She hadn't heard that name in over a decade. The sound of it wrapped around her throat like a rope. Grayson Webb had been her first everything. First love, first business partner, first betrayal. Back when they were both 20-something tech prodigies, bright-eyed and hungry, they had launched their startup with nothing but a garage, a dream, and too much caffeine. And when the big money came in, when the venture capitalists lined up and the first 7-figure deal hit the table, he took it, without her name, without her share, without her. She remembered the article in Tech today. Grayson Webb, the new golden boy of Silicon Valley. Her name wasn't even mentioned in the footnotes. Now he stood before her, older, with silver at his temples and regret in his eyes. "I heard about the gala," he said, "the speech, the letters, the clinic in Brooklyn." Cassandra folded her arms. "So what? Came to congratulate me?" Grayson shook his head, a little laugh escaping. "No, I came to apologize." That word, apology, landed between them like a cracked plate on a silent table. "I don't want anything," he continued quickly, sensing her caution. "No PR redemption, no deal. I needed to tell you I was wrong." She stared at him. "It's been 16 years. "I know, and I thought about coming sooner. I wrote emails, letters, burned every one of them." He paused. "I watched from afar, saw how you disappeared, how the press stopped talking about you, and then how you started again, quietly, without the spotlight." His voice softened. "You've built something better than a company. You've built people." Cassandra didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to scream. Another part wanted to run. But the woman standing here was not the girl he had left behind. She had built herself back. And Emma's voice echoed gently in her mind. "Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places." "Why now?" Cassandra asked, her voice even. Grayson sighed, eyes low. "Because I'm dying." The words hit like a slap. He gestured to the scar just peeking out from beneath his collar. "Pancreatic, stage 4. 6 months, maybe less." She blinked, the world tilting slightly. "I don't want to die with this still on my conscience," he added. "What I did to you, it haunts me." He handed her a folder. "Your original patent designs. I've kept them all these years. Yours, not mine." Wow. She took them with shaking hands. It wasn't just paper. It was history. Her name in ink. Her ideas. "I've made arrangements," what he said. "When I'm on in, my shares in the company will fund the Olive House Clinic. Quietly, anonymously. You won't ever have to see my name again." Cassandra sat on the porch long after he'd left. Emma found her there an hour later, her eyes glassy, the folder still unopened on her lap. Without a word, Emma sat beside her, folding her hands in her lap. "He's dying," Cassandra finally said. "I know." Emma replied softly. They sat in silence, two women who had seen too much, lost too much, survived too much, and somehow still believed in tomorrow. Will you forgive him? Emma asked gently. Cassandra didn't answer right away. But then she said, I think I already have. Not for him, for me. The olive house was silent. The sun had just dipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind a soft lavender sky streaked with golden ribbons. The lights inside the house glowed gently, casting warm halos across the hardwood floors and worn rugs that had been donated with love. Emma sat at the old desk in the corner of the upstairs study. It had once belonged to Cassandra's grandmother, and every drawer carried a faint scent of cedar and ink. Outside the open window, the breeze carried the scent of lilacs and the distant laughter of children playing in the street. Emma held a pen in her hand, one gifted to her by a little boy at the clinic, who had drawn a star on it and whispered, "Because you help people shine." Before her sat a blank page. It wasn't addressed to anyone, not to Cassandra, not to William or Alfred or Emily. It was addressed only to herself. Emma took a breath and began to write. Dear me, you made it. I know you don't always feel that way. You still hesitate in rooms full of mirrors. You still look over your shoulder when people say your name too kindly. You still flinch when someone asks you to speak first or sit at the head of the table. But you made it. You came from a kitchen where your hands smelled like bleach and your shoes squeaked on marble. You folded laundry until your back ached, swept hallways while your dreams lived in the dust. And still, you never stopped learning. I remember those nights, when the house went quiet, when everyone else slept, and you studied with a flickering lamp and a cup of lukewarm tea, when you whispered Latin anatomy terms to the ceiling, when your fingers bled ink but you kept writing. You thought no one saw you. But someone did, and now you've stood in lecture halls. You've saved a life with steady hands. You've been thanked by the strangers whose names you'll never remember, but whose eyes told you you mattered. And that, dear Emma, is enough. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. You are not what they called you when they thought you couldn't hear. You are not a joke or a maid or a footnote in someone else's story. You are the author now, and your story is far from over. Love, Emma. She sat back, read the words again, then folded the letter slowly, once, twice, into a neat square. She slipped it into the back of her journal, not to be mailed, not to be framed, but to be remembered. Downstairs, Cassandra was preparing tea. William was due to arrive soon for their weekly walk around the neighborhood. Emily had sent another update from her new volunteering project in Maine, her letters now filled with questions, gratitude, and reflections, not demands. The world had shifted, not perfectly, but profoundly. Emma walked down the stairs barefoot, her steps soft against the wood. She paused at the doorway, watching Cassandra arrange mugs beside a tray of lemon cookies. You okay? Cassandra asked, not turning around. Emma nodded. I wrote something. Cassandra smiled. To someone? Emma paused. To everyone I used to be. Cassandra set the kettle on the stove and looked up. And what did she say back? Emma smiled. She said, thank you. That evening, the olive house glowed against the dusk like a lighthouse in a storm, a symbol of how far one act of kindness could ripple. A home built not of stone or wealth, but of second chances, forgiveness, and the brave decision to believe in someone, especially when that someone is yourself. Emma stood on the porch as stars blinked awake in the sky. Her journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But tonight she didn't carry it alone. She was no longer just a name on a roster. She was Emma, doctor, teacher, friend, and in the deepest, most honest way possible. She was finally home.